Hey everyone, I'm Lorenzo, and today I'm going to teach you on how to build a basic web page. And that way we can introduce you to the very fundamentals of programming and simply how it works. Because programming looks scary to most people, but once you see how you can build a web page, you're going to realize that there's a reason as to why middle schoolers are able to build very successful apps these days. That once you get a lot of practice with it, is actually very, very, very easy. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up your browser. Now, everything I'm going to show you right now is on a Mac because that's the main thing I use. But anything I will show you today is also works on Windows or any other kind of operating system you might have. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to launch your browser. In my case, my browser is Opera, but you can have Firefox, you can have Google Chrome. I hope most of you know what a browser is, but if you don't, that's what you use to search things. Like the basic program that's used to get access to the internet. So the first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna go and download Sublime Text. What Sublime is a text editor, which is what we use. It's the platform, it's the program that we write the code on. Kind of like Microsoft Word, but specifically for code. The reason why I use Sublime Text is because it's free. Not the 3.0 version. Don't download that. Download the Sublime Text 2, the 2 version, which may be downloaded and evaluated for free. However, a license must be purchased for continued use. There is currently no enforced limit time for the evaluation. Yeah, basically, their whole thing is they get you to use the 2.0 version, and once you want to upgrade to very sophisticated features, which personally I have never found the need for, you can download Sublime Text 3. So you're going to download Sublime. In my case, it's already downloaded. And you're going to close your browser. And then you're going to open up Sublime Text Editor. So this is what Sublime looks like. The only distinction is that when you're first going to see it, it's going to look a little bit more like this, right? Which is why what you want to do is go on View, Layout, and 2 columns. And you're going to understand in a little bit why that's important, why you want to have 2 columns for your code. So this is where we can write our code. So you can see I can just type in random words and the text editor reads them. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to save our file, right? Save as. Although I suggest everybody to start learning the keywords. The cool thing about Mac is that it shows you the shortcuts, the keyboard shortcuts this way. But yeah, we're going to save it as index.html. The reason why we're going to call index.html is because anytime you're going to build a website, it needs to have an index.html page. That way the browser knows where to start, because index.html is by default the first page the browser is going to upload. If you don't have an index.html page, then the browser will not know which page to upload, and yeah, that's going to be bad. And in my case, I'm going to save it on my desktop. But before we do that, I suggest everybody to make a new folder. We're going to call it Practice Coding. Right? And I'm going to save it in there. Right? And as you can see, Sublime registered. This is an index.html file. Whenever you write your code, before you do anything, and you open up your text editor, in this case, we're going to be using Sublime again because it's the easiest one to get accustomed to and to get introduced to. There are more sophisticated ones that we'll introduce you to later on. So index.html, the reason why you want to save the file before you start writing the code is that way your text editor can actually help you write the code. And we're going to see this very briefly. The last thing I was going to say is the reason why we save it as index.html is to show that the file name is index, and it's also an HTML file. HTML is the first language we're going to learn today, and it stands for Hypertextual Markup Language. That's a very fancy word for saying it's a language to organize your content for a web page. It basically determines the position of things that allows you to then use other languages and write other programs to be able to say, oh, that object that's within and after that other object. You're going to see how that's going to work on a little bit in a little bit. So once we say it is index.html, the first thing we're going to talk about is tags. By tags, I mean anything that's within baby alligators. That's what one of my instructors always called it. Basically, the less than and greater than sign. That's a tag. And HTML operates in tags. They're either open, like this, or closed, and you just have the slash sign right there. And the name of the tag needs to always be the same. And I'm just using tag, but like it could be like whatever, right? And whatever. So, and none of this actually shows up on the browser. The only thing that will show up is whatever you write inside. So, hello world. Bam. So one of the basic mechanics of HTML is that you write your content, or like you write whatever you want to display on the web page within tags. And anytime you open a tag, you need to close it. So let's start with a very basic web page, right? Like let's see how it works. It's actually very simple. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna start with the one exception to the open and close tag, because overall the rule always is whenever you open a tag, you need to close it, except for the very first tag that always needs to be at the top of your document, which is bang, that's the exclamation point, capital letters, doc type, HTML. That's the basic thing that you need to write. That way, when the browser reads the document, it's able to read, oh look, it's an HTML type of document. Does that make? And I hope that makes sense to everybody. You write that in, and you're never going to have to worry again. Just copy and paste it from now on anytime you build a web page. Then we're going to start by writing HTML, because that way we're going to start. That's signifying that we're starting a document that says HTML, right? And we're going to also close the tag. Then we're going to make another space, and we're going to start with the head, and we're going to close head, and then the body. We close body. Now, the important thing to realize is that nothing that you're going to write in the head is actually going to show up on your web page. None of the tags, again, will show up on the web page. Just anything on your body will show up on the web page, but nothing in the head. The head is kind of like the brain of your web page, where you write all the different, a bunch of things and a bunch of commands and instructions as to how the web page will operate. But you're never going to see them in the same way you never see like your brain for a human being. It's only in the body that like things will actually be able to show up on the web page. So in the head, and as you can see, I indented. The indentation is very important in HTML because it's the way you organize content, because it shows that it's what's called nested, like within a certain, like it's within a certain within a certain tag or within a certain element. And in this, except when you write HTML head and body, some people indent it kind of like this because they indent after HTML. That doesn't really matter in terms of like browser purposes or like when you write your code. It's just a difference of practices. In this case, it doesn't really matter. You can just start with this. So the first thing you write in your head is like title. And we'll call this example web page. And remember, close your tag always, always. And that's going to show up as like the title of the web page. When you write, like when you open up your browser, like right here, like right here, this is the title of the web page. In this case, it says speed dial, right? And then, and that's pretty much all we need for right now. So let's go to the body. So in the body, we can pretty much write things, and it will show up as part of the web page. And I'm going to show you like the 5 basic tags. There are all sorts of tags that are in HTML, and you can learn them all on your own. I'm just going to show you the basics today. We're going to start with a paragraph. Well, actually, no. Let's start with a header. In HTML, you have like however many headers you want to, but like the default ones is 6. So you have H1, H2, H3, and H5 and H6. The idea being that H1's in terms of hierarchy, it's going to be the bigger one, and H6 is going to be the smaller one, and everything in between, right? So, and H always refers to headers, which is like basically titles of things within the web page. So, in the case of this H1, we're going to write welcome to my web page. And we're going to close it. Remember, always close it. Then we're going to save it. No, don't close Sublime. Just, well, I mean, I guess in this case we can close it. We're going to close it. We're going to go to our practice coding, right? And as you can see, like right here, because we saved our documents at HTML, it's going to show up as like the name, like the symbol of your default browser will show up right next to it, because it signifies that your browser is ready to read it. Now, we can say open with. In this case, I'm going to say open with Opera. In this case, my browser will open up this file. And as you can see, this is the very basic way of seeing how a web page works. Your browser open up, you read our code, and as in our code says, like the title will be example web page, and then we have a header saying welcome to my web page. That's all we have written for right now. You see how it's very, very simple. That's going to be the very basic way we're going to approach writing our code today. So we can go back to Sublime, right? Well, actually, no, I'm not gonna. Let me do that in a simpler way. Let me close Opera, and in this case, I can click on it, right? Like, because if you click on it, it automatically opens it as your browser. So if you do, so that's what you need to do. Open with Sublime Text, and we have it opened again. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to go back to my Finder and also leave this open. I'm going to show you just how. Oh, by the way, I'm using Command Tab. In Windows, it's Alt Tab. That allows you to open up. If you have anything open, it allows you to move across it. That way, you don't have to like close and like minimize things every time. It's really awesome. You should get used to it. So you see, if I wrote web page like this, for example, remember, you have to save it every time, and then we refresh it with Command R. Welcome to my web page. You see, everything changes by the time you change it. So that's how a header works. Then we got paragraphs, and that's small piece, and that's for just very basic text that doesn't really have any specific function. It's just, you know, like long series of text. Hey everyone, this is my first time coding. Bam, we save this, and let's see what that looks like. You see how much smaller that is? Well, it's because it makes sense, and H1 is a header, which is the way, which is supposed to be much bigger than the paragraph. Well, let's also see like what an H2 looks like then. H2, now I am going to become a master, and then we also close the H2. Save it. So the H2 is smaller than the H1, but it's still going to be so much bigger than the paragraph. And don't worry, we're going to like learn today how to like change all of that. This is just the default. So you basically understand the way a paragraph works. By the way, let's see what happens if we, you know, like hit return and write a paragraph that way. You see, it doesn't really matter. HTML does not read indentation or return in the way like you would normally read it. Like even if I were to say, if I were to like indent paragraph right here, you see how it does not change at all where it is? Because this is just like HTML just organizes content for you to like be able to reference it when you write other kinds of code. Not that, but if we were to like say do something like this, oh by the way, yeah, like you're gonna see this a lot if you have the 2.0 version. Just click cancel. It doesn't really matter. You're still gonna get to use Sublime. You see, it still does not affect anything because that's not the way HTML works. It's not about what space you have here or anything like that. It's just about organizing content. We're gonna learn later on like how to implement space and how that works. But for example, if you want it like hey everyone and put like this is my first time coding like right below it, what you would do is you close this paragraph, right? And remember, don't think of a paragraph in the same way you think about it in English class. It doesn't have to be a literal paragraph. It's just paragraph is what contains regular text. So if we close it here and open another one right here, we get it like this. So that's what a paragraph looks like. Then we have buttons. Some of my favorite. Button, click me. I'm going to close it. And as you can see, this is a very simple, very basic button. Pretty self-explanatory. Then, after paragraphs and after each and after buttons, we've got lists. There are two kinds of lists. There are unordered lists and ordered lists. So, because we have unordered lists and we have ordered lists, we have to differentiate between the two. And the way we do it is through their tag. UL stands for unordered list, which should make sense. And you have ordered list, which is OL. So, in this case, we're going to first do unordered. Well, I guess let's do ordered list first. Ordered list, the reason why they're called ordered is because the order in which your content is going to be displayed actually matters. And it's going to show it through like a 1, 2, 3 kind of thing. And you're going to see this in a little bit. So, let's say ordered list, and then we close it. And then, this is very important, we're going to indent and say LI. LI stands for line item. And we're going to, well, let's introduce an H3, right? And say foods I like. And then LI, like we can say pizza. And we're going to close this. And then we can say pasta. And then we can close it. And then we can say salad. We can close it. Once we save it, you see we have an H3 showing foods I like, and then we have 1, 2, 3 pasta ordered salad. This is very important. You need to indent all of this because everything is part of the ordered lists. Now, if you look at it, it's not really going to matter because even if it's not indented, it's still going to look the same. But it's going to matter when we get to progressively more important coding, because the reason why HTML exists is to be able to organize your content, and it makes sense that whatever is in these line items in this header are within the ordered list. So to indicate something is within, you indent. That way you understand, oh, like this is on the same side and this is inside it. It doesn't affect the spacing or anything like that. It just affects the relationship. That's why to describe the relationship between the different elements, we use a couple of terms. So the OL, the ordered list, is the parent of the H3 and the LIs. So if the OL is the parent, is their parents, then the LIs and the H3 are the children of the OL, and H3 and LI are siblings to each other. That's the basic relationship. Now, that's an ordered list. Let's see what it looks like when we have an unordered list, and that's why we use U for unordered. Remember, always close it. It's just these basic dots because the order does not really matter, and it always works in the same way. So you have ordered lists and unordered lists. So let's switch back. And you would have an unordered list for something like role models. You can say Gandhi. MLK. And for some of you, One Direction. No, I'm just kidding. So I save it. Whoa! What did I forget? I forgot to close this. Forgot to close it. But nothing really mattered here, right? Because if I save it, it still looks the same. Well, what if I then do something like this and I say P, hello, this is the unclosed section. You see how now it became part of the list? Why? Because we didn't close it. And remember, it doesn't matter if it's indented or not in terms of the way it's displayed. So even if it's not indented, P has just become a sibling automatically because it's contained within unordered list because the unordered list is not closed, right? That's why if we were to close it, the P now would be outside of it. Okay, so that's the basic, like the way, the very basic structure of those are like the basic tags. The next one is going to be a little more complicated. It's called the anchor. Anchors are places in which you put an anchor on a web page, much like you do on a ship. And the important thing that's going to happen is that it allows you to link things from outside. And you're going to let me give you a quick example that explains it very effectively. So let's pretend I want to create a link to the homepage of Facebook. So I'm going to go to my browser, go to Facebook. Well, actually, no, that's not Facebook, sorry. Yeah, let's go to the homepage of Facebook. We're going to copy that. I'm going to close it. Go back to our code. Then we're going to say A for anchor. href, which stands for hyperreference. Doesn't really matter. Just remember href. Then equals, right? Like so, the hyperreference equals 2, and no spaces. Href equals 2. Open up your columns, and did you see what happened? Like Sublime auto completed. Oh, by the way, I think you probably noticed that the awesome thing Sublime does is that it color codes your code. That way, it's easier to understand. Like, oh yeah, red are the tags, and like white is text. That makes sense. That's the reason why Sublime is very helpful to people. But anyways, so you make an href, and then we're gonna paste Facebook. That's the link. So href, and we're gonna close it, and then we're gonna say link to Facebook, right? And then we also need to close the anchor. Remember, always close your tags. So what happens? Whoa, here's the anchor. You see like it's a normal hype. It creates a hyperlink. So if we click on it, bam, we're redirected to Facebook's page. So that's the way anchors work. So, a cool thing you could do, for example, you remember your indentation, you could say button, indent the anchors, go to Facebook, close the button. That way you have a button that redirects you to Facebook. Actually, this is actually going to be a really bad practice. So, and you're going to learn this in a little bit. It's not really good practice to do this, but it makes. I think it carries the point across. These are the very basic tags. Anchors allow you to create references to documents, code, and stuff outside of it. You can also do images and all sorts of stuff like that. Buttons are buttons, paragraphs, whole text, list, ordered your list, and the different H's stand for headers. I think that's the very basic. That's the basic of HTML. And as you can see, we have built a basic web page, and it wasn't particularly difficult. You see, HTML is one of the easiest languages to learn. Now, we're going to open up another document, new file. I want to move it right here. That way, we can still look at our HTML, and now we can also start a new document. And we're going to save it. We're going to say style. Style.css. So like we did it earlier, we saved it with an extension, so that means that it's not going to be an HTML code in an HTML file. It's going to be a CSS file with a CSS code. CSS stands for cascading style sheets, and cascadeness is the property on which this system of code operates, and I'm about to illustrate the way it works. So good practice to have. You go to practice, you go to your main folder, and make another folder. I'm going to call it style sheets, because you can have multiple. You're going to have multiple ones of these files once you develop different web pages, and then save your style.css in your style sheet folder. Bam. Now we have it written. So the way CSS, what CSS, the reason why CSS as a language is used is to style the different elements in your HTML, and it works in a very simple way. So let's pretend I wanted to change the color of this H1 as blue. I would write H1, open the graph parentheses, color, blue. Now, well, it did not turn blue. Why? The reason why it didn't is because there is no connection between these two documents. How do we make connections between documents, between code? How do we inject external elements, external stuff into our HTML document? Remember the anchor, except it's not with an anchor, but it's with a link. In the same way, you link outside stuff. In this time, it actually goes in the head. It's a special kind of. And you say link href. Remember, hypertextual reference. And we say style sheets. Did I say it? Style sheets or? Yeah, style sheets. I wasn't sure if it was style sheets or style sheet. So we're creating a link in the head, right? So before you even process this content, you're going to operate with this mechanism by implementing this code. So go to style sheets and get this style.css file. And then you have a couple of things that don't really matter, but it's still good to have. I think they're going to be eliminated with the next version of, with the next, in the future. They're just really important for good practice. So we're going to explain, okay, so you're telling the browser, what am I linking? You're linking a text file written in CSS. You write it this way. And what's the relationship of this file to this document? What's a style sheet? And a link is another one of those exceptions where you do not need, kind of like doctype HTML, where you do not need to have a closing tag. So yeah, so once we link it this way, remember we did it because index.html is right next to the style sheet folder. If the style sheet folder was outside, what we do is we would say 2 dots, which makes it go outside of the current folder. So it's saying like go in the current folder, find style sheets, and find CSS. So let's go back to our browser. Let's refresh. Bam! H1 has just become blue. So the way CSS works is that you don't write, there's no command, there's no really specific rhetoric, it's just describing. Both HTML and CSS are what's called declarative languages because they declare things into existence, as opposed to assertive languages that make arguments and operate with the famous like if-then kind of thing. So you reference an element, like anything in red is an element, and then you select an attribute, which is the first thing, semicolon, and you give it a value, and then you close it. Do not forget this, because if you do, well, I mean, I guess in this case it works, but like it just normally breaks the code. It's gonna break your code. Trust me, like it's bad. It's just bad. And always close it this way. So yeah, let's pretend. Let's change the size of something. So for example, we can change button size. You can say background size like 20 pixels. Bam. This is what it did. And it turned it gray because we broke out of the simple basic structure of the button. But it doesn't really matter. We could say background color. Look at the awesomeness of Sublime. You know, it gives you all these filling things. Background color, green. Bam! All these buttons became green. So that's the way it works. Now we're going to add a little more to our HTML. We're going to add 3 more things because they make sense in CSS. But before we're going to do that, we're going to talk about cascadeness, which is the main property of CSS. So let's see what happens if I say H1 color blue and H1 color red. I saved it already. What's going to happen? Some people may say, oh, it's still going to be blue because it's the first thing you said and it's higher up in the document, right? And some people are going to say, oh, no, it's because it's the latest thing is going to be the command that's going to override everything. The latter is what's true. Cascadeness from the Latin cascare, which means to fall, is the property of CSS that enables the latest, the furthest at the bottom description, declaration for the same exact thing to come prior and to overarch the anything that comes before it. So what that basically means is what the browser is going to do is going to read this document, remember, before it even implements anything. So all the H1s will be blue, then the buttons will have a background size of 20 pixels and a background color of green, and then the H1s will be color red. This one will always comes prior to this one. So first the browser will implement it like it's blue, and then it's going to implement it like it's red. Look. Bam. But you're just not going to notice it because it's almost as if this never existed. Oh, by the way, what I just shown you is how to comment stuff out. What you do is you select it. Then in the case of a Mac, like you do command slash. But if you were to write it manually, you write slash asterisk. And then if you want to close it, you do asterisk slash. And if you comment it, save it, you see everything, like it nullifies. It's almost as if it didn't exist. It's a good way to test what happens if some code is absent. But it's also a good way to like specify and write comments about your code. Like for example, like right here, we can write it example of ordered list. Well, in this case, we're going to do this. Yeah, that's the way you do it, yeah. And then how to style buttons. If you ever work with anybody, it's always good to have comments because some things might not make sense to anybody outside of you. That actually happens to me with one of the people that I work with all the time. He writes these very complicated code, and I ask him like, why does it exist? What's going on? And you can never tell. But that's why you should always include comments as to why you're making certain decisions and what certain stuff means, if it's not overwhelmingly clear. Okay, so the last thing that's said overarches this if anything that comes before it, if they're referencing the same exact element. Like, because if I were to say background color blue, well, actually no, we're going to say teal, right? This wouldn't be an issue because we're not referencing the same exact thing. It will only be an issue if I say color teal. There's only going to be the conflict is resolved with the last thing that's said. So let's pretend I say something like paragraphs, font size 30 pixels. Wait. This one is like a special paragraph. I don't really want. I want all the paragraphs, but that one to have a font size of 30 pixels. Well, can I say paragraph? Not that one though. Let's see. Yeah, no, I just broke the code. That's not the way it works. So you use two things in the HTML. They can help you solve this issue. One of them is an ID. The way IDs work, you say like ID equals exception. So remember, kind of like the href. So you write it equal within the quotation marks, and you write the exception. Don't put spaces. Never spaces. Don't put spaces. We're going to learn what spaces mean later on. But yeah, don't put space, no spaces. Save it, and then you can say p font size of 30, and then hashtag exception, which hashtags that like is the way you reference an ID on CSS. ID, you know, like an identification. And we can say, well, in this case, let's say color red and font size 20 pixels. Bam! Right here. Solve this issue right here. The other and IDs like are rarely used. Because IDs are normally for something you're only going to use once, one time. Because what if you wanted to say, for example, everything like you want to reference the LIs. So you say LI. Let's see. Well, let's always do. I think color is the color teal. Okay, so the LIs have color teal. But what if you wanted to say only the second LIs? Well, you know that it's every second, so there are multiple ones. So what you would do is you would use a class. Class is group of multiple things. Like in a class, there are multiple students, and each student has their own student ID. So class is reference like you're using them to refer to multiple objects, multiple tags, multiple elements within your HTML. So in this case, let's do the first one. So we're gonna use a class called fave, right? Because it's your favorite. And in this case, it's not the first one. One Direction is your favorite, right? So the way you reference a class is not through the hashtag, but through the period to a dot before you start the name. So dot fave is referencing that class, and then you write color. No, let's do something different. Let's do font size. Font size 50 pixels. Well, no, let's not get ourselves to do 35. Let's save it. Bam. Because remember, you also have to save the HTML, and I saved it in this case, so it's not an issue. So bam, that's the way it worked right there. And if I were to do color green, well, actually, no, let's do color orange. It would also turn orange because I'm being, yeah, that's the way it works. What if you wanted to say, you wanted to change the color of not all of the H3s, but only the H3s within unordered lists. So I'm gonna make 2. We're gonna repeat it. So you could use a class, right? But if you didn't want to use a class and you wanted to say, well, actually, let's do this. So what if you wanted to only reference the line items within the first unordered list? So the way you would go about it is you give it a class. I normally try to use classes and not IDs. So class, and you would say role model, like roles. So to reference all the LIs within this class, you would say roles space. Never do it anywhere else. I mean, you have a space like before the parentheses, but I'm talking about like anywhere else. Like that's not, because a space actually means within. So go to roles, and all the LIs within roles, color yellow. Bam. It worked right there because we're saying all the LIs within the class of roles. So what if you wanted to say all the LIs within the class of roles get yellow, and the H3s within the ordered list? You put a comma, because commas means and, it's a conjunction, so you can write like multiple things having the same kind of styling. So within the allies within roles and OL H3, so the H3 within OL. Save it, and you can see it turned yellow right there. So the way you want to so if you include a space, you're saying like whatever this within that. If you're putting a comma, it's this and that. That's the way CSS and index work. The last thing we're going to talk about is divs, divisions. They're ways of dividing the section and dividing your web page in order to be able to style it and use these kind of systems to be able to effectively work it out. So for example, and the way it works is you use div. You just write div. So div. Let's indent all of this because everything's going to go inside that div except the H1. And then close that div. What happens? Nothing. But that does not mean the div is non-existing. Let's go to div. The way I normally, like, one of the good practices to have is like figure out like what's within what and like what's the limit of what. So in this case, right, what I normally do is like border 1 pixel solid black. So I'm saying within the division, give it a border of 1 pixel solid border and of the color black. You see, now we're seeing what the div looks like. So the div still exists. The div still exists. We just don't see it yet because we haven't styled it. But if I were to say background color blue, bam, that's the you would totally see it. But let's take it off because that's annoying. So once you've seen this, once you've seen the way a div looks like, we can say something like width 80%. You see how it's changing? Or I could say width, and that's 80% of the parent element it contains. In this case, it's like the length of the entire page because it's within body. I could say width 300 pixels. That's the width. That's 300 pixels. Well, that's not enough. 500 pixels. Yeah. Okay. Look. So now I use it to contain it, and then I can center it. The way you center is by margin 0 auto. What that's saying is in top bottom and yeah, because like the way it works is like margin top bottom and left right. So in this case, we're saying 0 at the top and the bottom, like no margin, and that's how many pixels is going to push the content outside, like away from, and then automatically, however much. So we're saying left and right will be exactly the same, and you can see how I just centered it, and that's the way, and that's the reason why a div is useful. So we can also give it a class name, such as container, right? Because it is container. And we can say container. And you see it still stays the same because that's doing the right thing. Now what if we have a div? Let's say we want to create another div because that's another section of the page. Div and let's give it a class. Div class lists. To any expert that's watching this video, seeing me how slow I am at typing, normally I'm very, very fast because I use a lot of shortcuts, but I'm trying to be able to show everybody so they don't get lost. But yeah, we have lists because if we just prior to we had div, right? Well, we had the issue that it's because we have multiple divs, right? Where we have this one and that one, so we can specify div.container, which in this case means like this only applies to the div that is a class of container, but this doesn't really matter in this case because there's only one div named container. But if you were to use the class, for example, class fave were to apply it to this, right? Well, in this case, what you want to say is li's that of the class of fave. Yeah, that way it stays the same. But yeah, you would say container. And then let's say lists background blue. Bam! Right here, we have solved this issue. That's the way. Now, in this case, we would have to move the div, right? Because we don't want to include that one. Because the lists are right here. Div. Bam! So, to quickly summarize, to quickly summarize, you have the head and the body in HTML. The head is where you implement the mechanisms that are going to apply to the page, and it doesn't really show anything on the page. And the body is where the content, where if you put the content, it's actually going to show up. You have paragraphs that hold text. You have H2s that make headers. You have buttons that make buttons. You have ordered lists and unordered lists. You have line items. And then you have divs that contain things. Now you have styles. Now you have CSS, which is the language used to style things. You reference elements or IDs or classes, and take an attribute like color and give it a value of blue. And once you're able to make the link with a hyperreference to the folder it exists in and a specific file, then you're able to build a very basic web page. You see, programming is not difficult at all. You just need to have a good instructor that shows you how to be able to figure this stuff out. And I hope you enjoyed it. Practice this kind of stuff to build your own web page, and like practice coloring and all sorts of stuff. And yeah, that's it for today.